The BBC now notoriously made false claims about the reason behind Nigel Farage being ousted from Coutts Bank. Nigel Farage fell below the financial threshold required to hold an account at Coutts, the prestigious private bank for wealthy customers, the BBC has been told. This turned out to be nonsense, according to the documents that Farage prized out of Coutts' sweaty hands. At the top they say, despite the adverse press, from a legal perspective, Nigel Farage has not been formally charged of any wrongdoing and is not subject to any regulatory censor, which obviously should be all you need to qualify to maintain a bank account. Then, relevant to the BBC's comments, they say this on him being declassed as a politically exposed person. Following the declassification, the client's economic contribution is now sufficient to retain on commercial basis. And to reinforce that, he is now declassed from higher risk PEP status, and so with his current risk status he meets the economic contribution criteria for commercial retention. All of that is the direct opposite of what the BBC wrote. That was the headline, written fully 8 months after Coutts themselves had ascertained the direct opposite. That was the headline written by the man whose £200,000 annual salary is paid by you, the licence fee payer, and that is the actual situation. So that original BBC headline which you just saw was recently changed. Headline number 1 recently morphed into headline number 2. All they've really done is to add "source tells the BBC." Those comments and that article were written early in the morning of July the 4th. Late in the evening of July the 3rd, so just 12 hours previously, the BBC was merrily hosting an expensive dinner at a 5-star hotel in London. Thank you to those who joined us at the Langham, London for the BBC Correspondents' Charity Dinner on Monday 3rd of July. You will agree it was a gay and sumptuous affair, and expensive. And that is unquestionably where the Coutts source ratted out Farage. Bank chief Dame Alison sat next to BBC journalist night before he tweeted claim about Nigel Farage. Another of the correspondents attending the event was Simon Jack, the BBC's business editor and part-time presenter of Radio 4's flagship Today programme. Sitting by his side was Dame Alison Rose, the chief executive of NatWest Bank. Other guests described them laughing and joking together during the meal. It would obviously be inconceivably, impossibly coincidental that the BBC fella had dinner with the Coutts boss one evening, then early the next day he writes about aspects of her business which are in the national news, but it was somebody else who told him. Obviously not. Clearly she told him. And Boris Johnson agrees. Basically, he's calling for her to be sacked here. I cannot say for sure that they were talking about the story of the hour, the claim by Nigel Farage that he had been mysteriously and arbitrarily dropped as a customer of Coutts Bank. I didn't hear Simon Jack ask Alison Jones the question that frankly it was his job to ask her that night, namely whether it was true that Farage had been boycotted for political reasons, as the former MEP seemed to suggest. I didn't hear what Dame Alison said, but you know what, I have a pretty good idea. In fact, I would wager the entire contents of my own personal bank account that they discussed the matter, and I would bet my house that it was no coincidence that the following day Simon Jack ran a BBC story claiming that the decision by Coutts to whack Farage was nothing to do with politics. Of course it was her, and Farage reckons that he can winkle written confirmation out of them.
Can I ask you, Dame Alison, was it you that breached my private client banking confidentiality? Yeah. Was it you that told Simon Jack that? Well, I'm going to find out, because today I've put in another subject access request, this time to NatWest Bank, and I'm in particular looking for any personal correspondence, Dame Rose, that concerns me. So in 30 days' time, we'll know the absolute truth.
It's worth pursuing a bit more, this intimate encounter at Langham's. It is also understood that he was offered a normal account at NatWest, which owns Coutts. People familiar with the matter rejected the notion that the decision to close his Coutts account was in any way political. It was for commercial reasons. The criteria for holding a Coutts account are clear from the bank's website. The offer of a NatWest account still stands. The BBC understands. People familiar with NatWest's thinking insisted that this was not the reason for the closure of his Coutts account. This outpouring of client confidentiality breaches is contradicted by the document published fully 8 months previously. The values Nigel Farage actively and publicly promotes champions do not align with the banks. That is the reason, and the document, if you read it, is an obsessive character assassination which hits all the woke talking points and is really nothing whatsoever to do with finance, racism, climate change, Black Lives Matter, all the usual suspects. Those are the values. So we know the real reason, and so, by extension, we know that the stated reason was a lie. On a relevant side note, who is this Wealth Committee anyway? Is it sober-suited white men 60 going on 150 like the bankers in Mary Poppins? Look in that same paragraph for a clue. He is considered by many to be a disingenuous grifter and is regularly, almost constantly, the subject of adverse media. What is a grifter? How many sober-suited middle-aged white men do you know who use modern American slang? Grifter being modern US slang for con artists. Not too many, I imagine. Who does use modern American slang? Blue-haired, 20-year-old activists with positions of enormously disproportionate power within these institutions, put there to satisfy the diversity quota. It's not the sober-suited middle-aged white men that we imagine populating these industries. Like with the BBC, you imagine it's like Hugh Edwards types or David Dimbleby behind the scenes. It's absolutely not them whatsoever. Why is Coutts bedecked in this? This is the facade of Coutts, and it wasn't put there by sober-suited middle-aged white men. It was put there by those same extremist woke activists who wrote the Farage report. Hence, it makes complete sense. The values Nigel Farage actively and publicly promotes champions do not align with the banks, because the bank's values are imposed by extremist activists put there to satisfy the company's diversity quota, not the bankers. Hence, when Lady Blabbermouth says this in her grovelling apology to Farage, "Dear Mr. Farage, I am writing to apologise for the deeply inappropriate comments about yourself made in the now published papers prepared for the Wealth Committee. I would like to make it clear that they do not reflect the view of the bank." Does that sound contradictory? Not at all. The bank has no such views. They are imposed on them by etc, etc, etc. So those hardcore left-wing activists, not the bankers, use their hugely disproportionate power to get Farage cancelled in order to spread the message, think like us or die. Literally so, because if you can't pay your water bill, how long can you survive without water? They get exposed, go into panic mode, spread lies, get exposed, go into double panic mode, and now they will absolutely certainly face pretty devastating legal consequences for breaching client confidentiality and probably huge fines. And they have caused a change in the law. Government clamps down on unfair bank account closures. Banks will be forced to explain and delay any decision to close an account under new rules protecting freedom of expression. The government has stepped in to address fears that banks are terminating accounts because they disagree with someone's political beliefs. The changes will increase the notice period to 90 days, giving customers more time to challenge a decision through the Financial Ombudsman Service or find a replacement bank. Banks will also be required to spell out why they are terminating a bank account, boosting transparency for customers and aiding their efforts to overturn decisions. It's not ideal, as I suspect that the Financial Ombudsman Service is an entirely useless appeal avenue, but it's something. And with all this publicity, the people behind the practice, who are the same people who are behind this irrelevant idiocy, they will think twice before doing it again, because they'll be wary of going down the same path to self-destruction that Coutts has gone down. That graphic that I used to highlight the BBC fake news compared to the reality I've put on Twitter, and a link to it is in the description. Might be worth a retweet if you feel up to it.